We do. Allow me 10.
So, hi, I'm Jack, and today I've got Alyssa and Sturgis with me
Hello.
as our guide.
Hello.
Alyssa and Sturgis are friends and people I've been able to interact with over a little less with Alyssa, a little longer with Sturgis, but in terms of depth, equal in terms of the capacity of our discussions to look at things, start to look at things accurately. And the essence of a mental obsession discussion is recognizing that what we are obsessed with mentally is how we are misutilizing or overutilizing thinking. It isn't thinking's wrong. It isn't I am wrong. It's my application of how I am utilizing thinking that has thinking backfire and become this sort of feedback cacophony of voices in my head spinning around that never seem to end. And what I set in motion is a choice. I'm free to make those choices. So the basic subtext of the conversation is to imagine, and none of this needs to be believed, agreed with, trusted in, hoped for, have faith in, none of that. If truth is true, and we can agree truth is true, it doesn't take a lot of belief and confidence in that to simply see that an admission of such a thing would be accurate if in fact there was any truth. Now, the only way that truth couldn't be true is to suggest that there is no truth. And if that's the case, then we would all be happy living lives that are disheveled and broken and faulty and depressed and unhappy, because that would probably be the nature of a very fractured existence, a very frightful, thought-filled existence. So if true is true and there's an absolute nature, then that is our nature, and existence is in fact the platform for our life form to function. And if we are dysfunctioning, it is something we are doing to cause that dysfunction, something we are choosing proactively, not something cast on us, not a curse, not a coincidence, not an accident, but something we are choosing that's causing it. So now that may be a lot to stomach in an introduction. And what this really is a discussion between people similarly struggling with the issue of mentally obsessive thinking, to give anyone listening or interested in listening an opportunity to hear some things that you may not think on your own or be happy to hear others think about with you. So Sturgis and Alyssa are here to talk to us about their experience, and literally all that any of us have that we can be relied on, that we can rely on accurately, is our experience. So we're not masters, we're not PhD. Well, we may be a PhD here, but those licenses and academic status don't qualify us any more than our experience to talk about our experience. And that's what we're here to do. So welcome, you two.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Jack.
I know that I'm seeing you, but the audience is listening. And my experience started in sobriety to see that my problem wasn't based in a symptom or an effect. And my suspicion is that compulsions all reflect obsessive thinking. So in any way we can address that together in our conversation today, I'm expecting that anyone listening who's interested in this may have a view or may get a view to something that they may not be thinking when they're thinking alone about their thinking.
One of the things that I thought would be helpful to kind of kick it off is the things that I was challenged by when I first encountered this conversation with you, Jack. I have experienced the consequences of attempting to manage, even when I've been able to be relieved or have the obsession of like physical addictions and even behaviors removed. one of the things that I found when I sort of personally got sober and stopped, drinking and doing drugs years ago, was relief, and I'll underline that word, in meditation. And it was something that I still look forward to every day, twice a day, and has shifted in many senses more than any other practice that I've ever found my experience with reality. And one of the things that you said to me early on, which hit me like a ton of bricks because I understood it, felt it like as truth, but was also really challenged by it, was that, if you are simply meditating to get relief, to be relieved from the other symptoms that you may be experiencing, then that may not be freedom. That perhaps there's more freedom that I can access if I examine or admit and take responsibility for some of the other for actually the disease itself and not just the symptoms. And so, the disease itself is one of the things I thought it might be helpful to sort of define, because we've been through, at least for me, a lot of different definitions of the disease model of something like addiction. Right. But, I think I've found that in my safari of all of the different programs of addiction that I've been able to visit, both inside of 12-step and outside, that I realize now, after having spent some time with you, Jack, and having, the ability to sort of examine things through a different lens, that that there's a way to grab some of this work at the root in a way that I hadn't before. And also, I'm happy to report, it doesn't mean I wasn't, it doesn't mean I gave up meditation. It means that meditation now hits different in the sense that what it feels like now is not taking a breath of air that I needed all day, but that instead I am, and it turns out this is exactly what many of the teachers meant by it. It is, I was taking my rightful place in the universe by sitting and just being.
So I think there's a couple of really powerful points that you brought up, Sturgis. One, just in terms of what is addiction, what is this disease? I think about the disease of addiction is an inability to stop despite negative consequences. And that's anything for me. It's lying, it's sugar, it's alcohol, it's attachment to relationships, like anything I compulsively do, and I can't stop despite the negative consequences. And one of the things, so you brought up meditation and about meditation bringing relief, and the question of whether or not, correct me if I'm wrong, there's more freedom to access, having taken responsibility for your thoughts, I assume, is what you're saying. And, it's interesting for me hearing you. So I've been a daily meditator for a very long time now. Meditation is something that I wake up and I do. And very recently, I've been obsessive, I've been in a conflict with myself. And the conflict I've been with is around, and so when I say conflict, I've been in a conflict with my thoughts. The thoughts I've been having about sugar, which is not the problem. It's my relationship, as Jack says, to that thing. So my thoughts about sugar have been something inconsistent with reality. When I have sugar, there is a physical impact, like an allergy, like alcohol. Like I physically want more of it. And I've really been in this, like, and my thoughts about this have been, it's not a big deal. It's not a big deal. You don't need to worry about this now. Deal with it later. You're not overweight. You don't compulsively do it. Like my thoughts are in this dialogue of why it's not a big deal. And so in my meditations, I've realized like I just am not free. Like I go and I sit and I close my eyes and I invite spirit to come in through my experience, spirit being the eternal source of now. But even as I do that, I'm doing it with my mind, with my thoughts and my internal conflicts about this particular conversation is what I'm just not like, this is the dialogue, right? Which has no relief, no peace. So I finally had to admit that I'm powerless over this series of thoughts and therefore that thing that I'm obsessing about. But it was interesting for me because since I've done that, my meditations have been so much more quiet. There's not a conversation about something. There is a sense of peace and relief I have because my mind is not engaged in a conversation about something that isn't true.
So you're noticing, both of you are becoming aware that when you look, you see. And when I'll suggest to everyone that peace is our natural state, knowing is our natural state, quiet is our natural state, silence is our natural state. A being awareness doesn't jabber and talk all the time to draw attention to itself. It simply knows. And that's a beingness that we all know. We know. And we wouldn't hurt and suffer if we didn't know we knew that. Hurting and suffering would seem normal. We'd be at the height of our capacity saying, look at me, I'm totally fucked up. And everybody would applaud and say, wow, you've really reached the height. But we don't feel that way. We feel hurt. We feel rejected. We feel disconnected. We feel unhappy. We feel apart from. We feel needy. We feel ashamed. We feel guilty because it's shameful and we are guilty for the thinking we're doing. So a couple of points to make. And you really made it, Alyssa. And Sturgis, you were hanging in the balance on it too. This idea, first of all, Sturgis, you said that you take your rightful place. Your rightful place cannot be given up. It's the place you're always in. Always. Now, when I start thinking I'm not, I'm thinking thought is my sole source and it is the guidance system for whether or not I'm in my right place. And then I'm constantly trying to get the thinking straight to bring the peace, rather than recognize that the peace is absolutely there. And the reason I even understand the conflict is because I know that there's a peaceful, quiet state, and this thing going on in my brain ain't it.
Yeah.
It is not it. Yeah. So, Alyssa, to your work that you do out there in the world, my sense is that you defined addiction as something, the inability to stop, regardless of consequences. Yeah. The destructive consequences are the natural consequence of addictive thought.
Yeah.
So to try to separate the two is once again to create an impossibility and continue to manifest and manifest and manifest the conflict. The fact is that you're always free. You're so free that you're allowed to choose to do the wrong thing and claim that it's right. You're allowed to choose the false thing and claim that it's true. You're allowed to make believe that what you think is all that there is, and then rely more on that thinking to get you where you already are, and think all the time it's out there somewhere else.
Which, can I make a point to that, Jack?
Yeah, please.
I think that's important. The feeling of guilt comes from that false choice.
It's accurate. You're guilty.
Result, right.
Yes.
Because it's a choice being made
Yes.
out of misalignment, or out of natural state of peace. Therefore, our feeling is accurate for the choice our thoughts are making.
Bingo. Yes. And so is disconnected. What's disconnected is our thought, not us. We are not disconnected because we are part of an infinite whole that is indivisible. So we can never be disconnected. We can never be asleep. We can never not be aware, but we can think we are.
Right.
And we can act like we are as a result to create problems, to say, see, I told you, I'm disconnected. Now I just got a 6-year prison sentence and I'm going to be sitting alone. You see? I can't see you anymore. Yeah. And we do those things to prove the thinking is right. So you were talking about being powerless over the thoughts. A lie has no power other than the thought it's not a lie. And what does a lie claim to be? True. And as long as we think it's true, we have this sense of power that we've created something that we can manage, while what we've managed to create is unmanageable.
Yeah.
And the more we do to try to fix it, the more we give it credit for even being anything when it's delusional. It has no basis whatsoever, but the conflict we're creating, and then using the conflict to suggest it's real because we're suffering from the infection of thought that we've actually imposed on our own experience. And that's all that it ever is. So addiction is a lie. Addiction doesn't exist in truth and reality. It only exists in my willingness to continue to maintain something out of the desperation that's created by the first thought. And I begin to react to the reaction I have and think that reacting and overreacting is one day going to be enough to finally put it to rest, when in fact it's the thing that's continuing to encourage it and incur it. So our feelings are accurate assessments of our thinking, not who we are.
Yes.
But what happens within the lie is that we become so absorbed and intoxicated by that capacity to lie and cheat and have our body release all these chemicals, not endorphins, but use up the endorphins with adrenaline and all sorts of other things that undermine our physical capacity to even be healthy. And we rely on that stuff to give us the impression that we're making headway, when in fact all we're doing is continuing to lie and lie and lie and lie. It's just a maintenance.
This idea that addiction is a lie, like, I want to break that down with you just a little bit, like in the example I gave. Like, so, because right, like, there is a physical, so the idea that addiction is a lie, I'm not disagreeing with you, but I want to like really like bring this point to clarity. Physically,
yes,
I have a reaction to alcohol and I have a reaction to sugar in my body, right? Yes. Which then like is different from probably others. I'm not sure. But when I have those substances in my body, there becomes a physical obsession about having more of those substances.
Yes.
Right? So then the lie is that I need those substances. Like, the lie is the relationship I'm creating in my mind to those things, which my mind is telling me I need, and my body is responding accordingly.
Well, to sick, diseased thinking, which is addiction, the problem is the solution, and the solution is the problem.
Right.
Because a lie claiming, think of a lie as a lie, it's no longer a lie.
Right.
A lie only exists as long as it's thought to be true. So in the same way, addiction reverses this in the physicality. The issue you're describing, in my experience, is how the Dr. Silkworth originally described the craving.
Right.
And an allergy to alcohol, an allergy to anything, is an abnormal reaction.
Yes.
So when we lie, we are reacting to something abnormally because we are not liars. by
Right.
nature. We are causing lies, we are creating lies, we are pretending we are lies, and that's basically and the sum total of what we think the ego is.
Yeah.
We start to think we have an abnormal reaction to the ego because the ego is an image of self. It isn't who we are.
Yeah.
It's a complete concoction of thought about who we are.
Yes.
It creates a character, which is why the character thought as being as who we are is defective, because the defect is the lie about the character. It isn't the fact that I can't have those characteristics and have them, but when I begin to think they're who I am, I'm doing the same thing I do with the lie, because now all of a sudden I become engrossed in this whole scheme, this whole play I've created, this whole script I've written to make believe that who I am is what I think, and that's all I am. And now the limits of my thought have to be defended at all costs. And that means anyone who doesn't think like me is attacking me when they say something, and they're hurting my feelings, which are already so hurt. I'm trying to pretend they don't hurt at all, and I don't feel them at all. Yeah. Because I'm so desperate inside.
I think also, I mean, for me, and I'm glad you asked that question, because the idea that addiction is based on a lie is something I sort of know, but I wanted to get my arms around it too when I sort of first heard it, right? I mean, for me, one of the ways I approach that is that when I couldn't stop, it was because I thought that I only had one option.
Yeah,
you know,
which is a lie.
Which is a lie, right? So that's where that comes from for me, right? And and we've talked about this a fair amount. Like when and for some reason, right? Like that seems to start in sort of end in thought for me, because I rehearsed it in my thinking so much that I was no longer neutral about it. I was lying to myself.
Yeah.
And when we get, I mean, and I've experienced this, not only with alcohol, but with behaviors of all shapes and sizes, including sugar, right? Like when I get sober from it, or when I am able to have that obsession sort of removed, I get to that place of neutrality where, again, I stop lying and start to have a choice again.
Well, you're beginning to it. The idea of powerlessness isn't less power; it's no power.
Yes.
And the fact is, a lie has no power that I don't consistently, every moment, imbue it with through my thinking that someday it will be true. Mm-hmm. That's the future uncertainty I face when I'm chronically willing to continue to do that, and then think that it's conspiring against me because I want to reinforce that I'm irresponsible for it, and it's something it's the only thing I can do. And interestingly enough, one of the inherent aspects of choice is not choosing. Mm-hmm. As a principle, choice always allows not to be chosen, or it is not a choice. Mm-hmm. So the idea we're condemned to it is a choice we make by making believe it's the only thing we can do, because desperation doesn't have us think very clearly or very well. So we often make the wrong mistake, thinking we need to do anything to survive, and we end up doing what's wrong over and over and over again, thinking someday it'll get better. And what happens is it slowly gets worse to the point where ultimately you can't even get off the pavement in some way or another, and start to say, maybe something's wrong here in the thinking. Consider that the source of that is in the abnormality of trying to make truth out of a lie. It's impossible, and so life seems to become impossible when we try to do that. And that's where all those other conclusions, when you thought it was impossible, Alyssa, to stop, within the thinking you were doing, you were accurate. Because it's impossible within the thinking to keep going in that circle and not keep going in that circle, because it's a self-serving, self-fulfilling prophecy that the outcome's going to be exactly as you presume it is, which is you're doomed, you're fucked. There's no other choice. There's nowhere to go. Mm-hmm. And the fact is, choice always allows not to be chosen. And how does that happen? By beginning to see that the basic thought we're holding, if there's any disturbance, it's based on a lie. The universe is not disturbed and arguing over what it's designed to do. It's simply doing it.
And a lie meaning a thought created separate from the truth of reality?
Well, it's actually created within it, because it's created. Thought is a function of reality. It's something that reality provides. But the idea that the lie is a thought that's wrong to begin with, and then it's thought to be right. That's the lie.
Yeah.
So what is a wrong thought? Something that has no place and can't fit anywhere, like 2 + 3 is 4.
Yeah.
You can repeat that, and you can add it into every calculation, and everything you do will somehow be wonky by that inclusion.
Yeah.
So a wrong thought is something that isn't possible because it can't work. It has no place. It doesn't belong. It doesn't fit. It isn't useful. It isn't functional. Then being thought of is real and true.
Yeah.
And what happens immediately is we feel condemned by the thought, and we think the brain is operating against us, and we think the ego is attacking us, and we think other people now, we're sort of suspicious of people. All of that gets set off because the consequences are, in fact, our admission that we know exactly what we're doing, but we don't want to see those consequences for what they are. We want to see them as something else is doing to us, rather than seeing it as something being done by us.
My experience is that anything we're not willing to say, any thought we're not willing to share is like that we hold. That is a wrong thought. Like that is us choosing to keep that lie a lie.
Well, it's the idea that it can be hidden that's the lie. And you know how it's expressed? Sweaty armpits.
Exactly.
Nervous.
Our feelings.
Suspect.
Our anger. Yeah.
Irritability.
So
reactiveness. All those things are admitting. I would suggest there are no secrets in the entire universe.
Right. And that is supported by A Course in Miracles says on some level, on the deepest level, everybody knows everything.
Yes. And it's not even deep, because superficial. What's deep is the ideas we keep and hold to our seeming self that would violate the precepts of an absolute state of knowing. It's impossible to have any impact on something that's absolute, no matter how deeply we think it's true. It's irrelevant if it's deep. If it isn't accessible, it isn't real.
Yeah.
Reality and truth are always accessible, always in reach, always available, always free, always here to choose from. And when we choose self-centered thoughts, limited thoughts, lies, that's on us. That's what we're doing that's causing it. And everyone else we see is culpable in what we're doing. We're simply using to excuse what we are unwilling to admit we're doing. Period.
Georges, I see you.
I just in the spirit of trying to kind of express this to people who may be sort of confronting it for the first time, I thought like it might be cool to fillet that even more, right? And because my own experience has been that I will do anything to escape the lie that I'm trying to deny, right? I thought maybe I could get one of you to react to just someone saying, well, look, these are my thoughts, and who are you to tell me, what thoughts are right and wrong? And if I'm having them, then why can't I just be having them? I've been asked that myself, I've been challenged with that statement, which is, don't be so presumptuous as to tell me that, my thoughts are right versus your thoughts are right, or wrong. In other words, like, I am still consistently trying to escape the lie I tell myself that the material world actually has something left to give me. Right? It's one I wake up with consistently still. And although right, and although that's a bit of a broad stroke, I wonder if I could get you to react to it, on that broad of a level too, because it's quite possible that there's someone hearing this who's going, well, how can you say that the material world has nothing left to give me? All my stuff is there, including my house and my children and my car, So I don't know. I thought it might be helpful and kind of a fun exercise to fillet that idea.
I like the word fillet a lot.
That's why I used it twice. It just kind of rolled out. I liked it too.
Me too.
Sort of exposes the raw guts of the whole situation. You want to address that?
I have a reaction. I mean, I have a reaction would probably be different than Jack's, but because Jack will correct, the thinking behind this. But see, I don't have, all thoughts are neutral. First of all, there are no right or wrong thoughts.
Beautiful.
There are our thoughts and our reaction to our thoughts. How we know a thought is sick is that we feel icky, we feel guilty, we feel shame, we want to hide it, we want to protect it, right? So the question of sharing your thoughts is not a morality conversation. It's not about right or wrong. It's about what's making you sick. Anything you're not willing to say is probably because you're protecting something that is a lie, that is wrong. If it weren't, you would say it. Like there's just the truth is the truth. Like Jack said, there's just what is. So the truth of who we are is what is. There is no reason to protect that. When we're protecting something, it's because there is something to protect, which by the very nature of something to protect, it's wrong, shameful, bad, which is the lie that we're talking about.
Well, and expanding on the consequences or the symptoms that you described, the shame and the guilt and the irritability and all that, is the sense of disconnectedness, the sense of loneliness, the sense of less than, the sense of low self-esteem. All of those things are accurate assessments, as you pointed out, of thoughts that have no esteem, have no value, are worthless, are useless, and all those things. When those thoughts have no substance to them of any meaning other than the imbued, implied sense that we can turn a lie into truth, there's nothing there except delusion and insistence, which continues to persist as long as we resist what we're doing, rather than say, oh, these consequences I'm struggling from aren't coming because I'm an oddball singled out in the universe by some hateful, spiteful power that just decides to fuck with me one day. These are directly related to my choice and my willingness not to even notice what I've chosen and then become in a fight over it and think that it's happening to me rather than being done by me. And I get into that chronic loop of just repeating it, thinking someday this will get better. And what I'm trying to do is become numb to it, which is a sentient being, meaning I'm sensitive and aware and my senses are speaking. All of a sudden, I'm putting that whole activity to sleep and thinking that my growth is based on becoming numb and disconnected from what's going on, rather than intimately familiar with everything that's going on levels well beyond humans have even begun to express telepathically and knowingly in ways that are well beyond what we think can be done.
Yeah.
So I don't tell the truth because as far as I'm concerned, the truth need not be told anything. It's already what it is. And it doesn't run around forcing us into a corner to abide by it. Never has. That infinite capacity is just what it is. And it just is what it is. And it just continues to be what it is. And it doesn't think about what it is because it doesn't think. It just knows. There's no division in it. There's no separation. There's no isolation. There's no discrimination. There's no divisibility. There's no pieces and parts. There's nothing to struggle over or fight with. All of those things are contained in a function of thinking. So what I do is not particularly try to correct, but enhance. From my experience, when I feel there's something said that may be short of seeing it clearly from a point of view where it becomes principled and absolute in nature, rather than the sort of fractured states that we can assign to stuff to manage it a little bit better and feel a little bit better. And my question back to Sturgis's comment about meditation is, why is it so important? I know that everybody I know that talks about meditation says, I can't wait to meditate. Every day I look forward to it. And my question is, what are you doing 23 hours and 40 minutes a day that has that 20 minutes seems so like such a relief? What are we doing while we're awake, interacting with our world and in our life form, seeing others and doing what we can to be the best we can? How are we failing in that when we're awake and interacting, rather than when we go sit quiet and alone and all of a sudden isolated, feel a little bit better? The other thing is, why does that peace always seem to be there when we look? When we're willing to sit quietly, why does it always seem to be there? You think it's just sent conveniently during that time because God said, here, you can have it now, but the rest of the day you're fucked. You're on notice. You better watch out. That's us misusing our natural meditative state of awakened awareness that we know we have, we are now. We are awake, we are aware, we know now. It's never been any different. All that's been different is what we think about it. And when I go off on a bender and make believe what I'm thinking is true, all of a sudden I think I'm the creator of reality, and that's the definition of ego. So now I become what I think I am, and any conflict with what I think becomes a threat to my supposed life. And it isn't even my life, it's just illusion. It's illusion. It's a mirage in the desert where I'm willing to, you said earlier, Sturgis, that you're willing to do anything to escape it, except stop doing the thing causing it. That's addiction. The one thing we're not willing to do is just to admit, man, if I'm making this up and I'm stuck in a delusion, I'm like a guy in the desert who's boiling in the middle of the Sahara Desert, seeing an oasis in the distance as a mirage, and he spends the rest of his life trying to get there, but there's nothing there. There's no palm trees, there's no shade, there's no water. It's all delusional.
Well, that's a beautiful opportunity to segue a little bit into, one of the pieces of the interview you gave us yesterday, Jack. In other words, one of the things I heard, we should probably say the poet's name out loud. Jack.
Yeah, I should just say what the podcast is. So, the references.
This was.
It was on KCRW. What do they call it? Life Experienced, and it was an interview with poet and philosopher David White, W-H-Y-T.
David White.
Yeah.
Yeah, David White. And David White, even from a poet's perspective, well, I guess not unsurprisingly from a poet's perspective, shares a lot of the sentiments. And one of the things I took away from that and noted was that, his statement, and connected to what you just said, Jack, is, the world is made to be free in. And, he suggests that we should give up all other worlds except the one to which you belong, the one to which in which we are free, right? Which is
the actual world,
the world, period, right? Yeah.
Right.
And that,
Whoops.
and I thought the way that he described doing that tactically was sort of interesting. He suggests that like the darkness helps to bring that to light, right? And that anything that isn't bringing you alive is the way that I think he put it, which I thought was, well, appropriately poetic, right? Is too small for you. And I was so struck by that, and I've been haunted by that. And I was also haunted by, in relation to the meditation and sort of the relief versus the consistency of being in a meditative, natural, in the meditative and natural state that we're in all the time. The way he also talked about prayer and the story he told of the monk who at the end of his life describes having given up, quote unquote, praying, because he acknowledges his whole life is prayer.
Exactly. And that's, to your point about meditation, we are naturally in a state of meditation and prayer, and our thoughts are our prayers, and addiction is the prayer of what our thoughts are thinking. When thoughts think, lies can be true. That's addiction. Is in fact, compulsions are in fact our prayers being answered. So our prayers are always answered. What we don't particularly like is that we think they should be something else. And when you think about life as being what's happening, if what's happening is happening and I'm sitting around thinking about what it should be, I'm thinking what it is isn't enough, when in fact it's all there is in that moment. That puts me at pretty great odds with all that's happening. And why wouldn't I be depressed over living that way consecutively over years and years and years and years, thinking someday it'll get better when I finally master something, rather than recognize that I've been given a mastery for free to express. And the world isn't free to live in, it's just free by its nature. And if you look at everything, nothing's arguing over what it's designed to do throughout the entire universe. It's pretty much exclusively us on Earth, arguing, fighting, coming up with thoughts that are in conflict with one another. Stars, all of it's doing exactly what we don't even need to understand it for it to be doing what it was doing well before our thinking even began as a species.
Yeah. And and I do think just, to acknowledge and continue to root for both meditation and prayer in whatever way we can get it. I think that my practice in both of those things for a number of years, and just discovering the way that I've done it, has led me, at least with more, muscle, to be in a more consistent, or to acknowledge and feel tangibly and consciously that I'm in, that ocean of consciousness all the time, more consistently than I had, So I'm all for it.
The beauty is also, Sturgis, just to begin to concede that you're in it regardless of what you think.
Yeah,
That's
just to say that out loud.
Yeah.
So right. But one of the things, Sturgis, what I loved about David White's quote, he said that the monk said, I was living and breathing from the atmosphere of prayer. Atmosphere.
Beautiful.
And for me, that meant context, like the atmosphere of his internal world. He had reached a state where it was such that the atmosphere, the context, like his space, the internal space he lived in was prayer.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Which would then, for me, what I reacted to was, wow, how like there's so, like, I have a polluted atmosphere. Like, I'm in like New York City in my mind. Like, there's like, I'm not, there's so many lies, right, that are like not true about the world, perceptions that I've created, that I have like, that I do get relief from those 22 minutes because in those 22 minutes, I'm choosing not to be attached to any of my thoughts. I'm choosing to not listen to any of them. None of them mean anything. They're all neutral. They're like air, and they're like dust leaving the house, right? Just getting flushed out, versus all of the other 23 hours where I actually am listening like they have something to say. I mean, now I've reached a point where I understand the nature of thought, but really it's the attention that I give each of my thoughts. To the extent that I think it's true, it will cause me pain. If I can release it and understanding it's simply a thought, then I don't have a connection to it. So when I think about, and I think about transformation and the transformation that I've received from having a relationship with a power that's greater than my mind, it's that I've allowed these thoughts to be changed through me. And so when I think about this monk, he's reached a state where his internal world he's been so innocent to opening himself up to the freedom that is available in the natural world, in the world, that he lives in a state where he's just breathing truth, breathing and praying and living truth.
So I would suggest that's what we're doing right now, thinking otherwise. And what he was finally doing, and what you heard him say exactly, was that he was admitting in thought that was the case. He didn't have to wait that long, but he chose to. And when he admitted it in thought, all of a sudden he witnessed what was actually happening accurately, rather than witnessing the havoc we create to distract ourselves from the greater awareness that never changes. And he said, give me his words again, because you remembered it very well, better than I did. He said,
that I was living and breathing from the atmosphere of prayer.
Yes. So now to say that, he was thinking that. And when I think it's not that, I'm going to make sure that what I believe in supports my thinking it's not that. And all of a sudden, my experience becomes I'm not there and I'm only there during that 20 minutes I get quiet. And my thoughts are dust then. But when I'm out in the world, they become much bigger. But really, what I'm witnessing is how prone I am to be desperate about what I'm thinking and make believe that somehow I can secure it by fighting for it and being reactive about it and defensive over it, rather than start to concede that that opportunity is there the whole time to see it's just dust. And I would suggest it's not even dust. It's dust on a speck of dust on a speck of dust. There's so little there that isn't being made to appear to be what it isn't, that I become convinced in delusion as being my source and wonder why I feel blocked. And now I am not suggesting not to meditate at all. And when you said that, Sturgis, I forget what you said, but it was something to the effect of, I don't want to minimize the magnitude and the potential. I don't think we could minimize the magnitude or potential of prayer and meditation by suggesting it's our normal state that we're always in. I think it really begins to acknowledge it the way that ascended masters and people who have done this for a long time finally slap their head and say, oh, of course, it's always been here. I just thought it wasn't here. I just thought something else in contrast to it. That was what was, it was never blocked. It was just my preoccupation and my intoxication with my thinking that gave me the impression it was blocked. But an impression is depressing if I continue to maintain it. So I create what seems worse. And all of a sudden I'm even more desperate rather than say, oh, any of the disturbance is just an indication I'm thinking something that's wrong. So in terms of other people, this isn't a conversation about pointing out to anybody what's wrong. The beauty is we each get to choose to see what we see and have what we have the way we have it. And I would suggest, if that's the case, that how things are for everyone right now is exactly the way we want them. And if we think we don't, therein lies the conflict. If we are responsible by nature, what we do is responsible. We may act irresponsibly, but it still keeps us. We are responsible to act irresponsibly. Our actions don't describe who we are, they describe things we do. Thought is something we do. It isn't who we are. So when I think who I am is what I think, and I need to hide it, because I know one of the reasons that loneliness tends to be so closely related to addiction is because when I sit alone, I know I can harbor all the wrong thoughts in the world, and I'm not at risk of anybody saying, you're full of shit.
Yes.
I'm in lockstep with my own self-serving tendencies and making believe that I'm plagued by loneliness, when in fact I'm asking loneliness to keep me from any view that might counter my own, like the interactive nature of being out in the world, where all of a sudden things are happening that I'm not thinking about. And they're happening unexpectedly. And as a result, I'm thinking, well, that's not what I thought should happen. And now I'm in a dance over what I think should be happening rather than simply witnessing what is happening. Or I am at peace and I am at ease. And that is a capacity that we not only all have, that we're actually witnessing presently, but thinking otherwise. And that thinking tends to become this dominance that isn't any more dominant than we give it credit for. Yeah. The resistance to what's happening is what persists. There is no persistence in what's wrong beyond what we're thinking. None.
Do you have a thought about that, Sturgis? Because I have a...
No, go ahead, please.
Well, it's a little bit off a different way. So, I mean, it's similar. It's a good segue, but it's not totally on topic. So I just want to give you a chance to respond to Jack if you had more thoughts.
No, now I'm too curious not to hear what you have to say.
Well, it brings up another really powerful quote that was made on this podcast, which is, anything or anyone that doesn't bring you alive is too small for you. Mm-hmm. Right? One of the questions that he says is, how have I made my own life too small for me? And that is, I think, from my experience, it's ego, but it also is the reason why addiction became so painful for me. Being addicted to a substance in particular was because my life became that substance. Like, it literally became that the all of the energy and all of the human spirit of like who I am, which is infinite, connected to infinite, became as small as when I was going to drink, how I was going to drink, the amount I was going to drink, the type I was going to drink, who I was going to drink with, what was going to happen after, if anyone was going to know. It was all about the thing. And, you know, for me, it's such a beautiful question, so powerful in the work that I do with clients, because generally where I've been in pain has been a place that I'm reluctant to grow. I'm reluctant to expand. There's something greater. There's something greater that is trying to emerge that I'm denying. And the way I'm denying it is by trying to control what I have now. And that comes in all different shapes and sizes, but it's the control starts in my mind, but it locks itself into the identity that I've given it, and which, you know, when I was an addict, it was literally, how much am I going to drink? But even now, sober, it's still like my reluctance. And he talks about this, really going after where you are reluctant, because anywhere you're reluctant is a place that you are too small. You're not growing. It's too small.
Well, it's an attachment to a defense of a thought that isn't true. You can't get smaller than something that doesn't exist. So if a thought, think of this is interesting, and it sort of just struck me when you were using your substance abuse and all that. A lie has no substance. There's nothing to it other than our insistence that there's something to it. That's it. So it has no existence. So you can't be smaller than something that doesn't exist, right?
Right.
So you have to think it's something to even entertain that it could be true.
Which is a lot, right? But so that thought, that's what I'm pointing to as small, not the substance. So you're accurately nailing me in the fact that I'm saying substance, but really it's thought that is.
But the thought is thoughtless in terms of substance. There's no content in that thought, which is what makes it false. We're saying it's everything when in fact it has nothing in it. That's the lie. But what's interesting is, what do we do to try to get away from it? Get addicted to substances.
Right.
So we have no substance in the thought, and then we go after substances to try to fill it.
Because in order to validate that identity, we have to make it true.
But we think we're making it true by acting out in compulsive ways and thinking that substance on the exterior is going to fill the lack of substance in our thinking.
Exactly.
So it's an endless attempt with the substance that never satisfies, because it's not the effect of the cause is if you're treating symptoms, you're never treating the cause. Yeah. And the idea of treating feelings and feeling better, same as in meditation. If you're feeling better through meditation, you're treating the feeling rather than saying, what is it that has me feel so disrupted all the time? If the cause is in thought and the consequence or the effect of the thought is the symptom, then how we feel is what we're thinking. And if we not only change the thinking, but simply admit that any lie we're maintaining is going to cause that sense of emptiness in terms of our feelings. So when we feel empty, when we feel alone, when we feel disturbed, Big Book says that, right? Whenever we are disturbed, no matter the cause, something is wrong with us.
Yeah.
Very, very central to the whole idea that it is what I'm causing that is the problem, not the effect. It's not the symptom of feeling, but the feeling is accurately telling me what I'm doing in thought. When I feel alone, the thought is so lonely it doesn't even exist. It has no place at all.
Right.
And yet I make believe it does, and it should, and it will, and I'm going to continue to maintain it and think someday it will become true. And in the meantime, I feel like a fraud.
Yeah.
Why? Because I'm perpetuating a fraud.
Yes.
That's what ego is all about, is image and appearance. Self-consciousness is an undue focus on how one appears. Why would that be the case if self-conscious were actually conscious? The fear is, I'm going to be found out. And what's going to be found out about me, the me I am, is the one that doesn't exist, the one I think I am. And all of a sudden, if somebody says anything, I'm like, oh, I can't hang around them. They really trigger me. They're toxic. When in fact, it's my own toxic waste that is being triggered. Right. It's my own reactive, my own nuclear reactor that's triggered by this critical mass of opposing thoughts that's revealing my own sensitivity to the defensiveness I'm maintaining. So it seems to break down in parts, but considering the absolute as absolute and starting to just let that be a contemplative meditation with eyes open and feet moving starts to allow us to function at our human capacity, because we are designed to express this absolute nature. That's how thinking is designed to, what thinking is designed to express. It's not designed for thinking to think of itself and wonder why all of a sudden it's struggling over who we think we are. Who we think we are is what we think. Who we are is who we are. And who we are is what we all share. Not in separate bodies, but we share together in an indivisible form that isn't bound by separation or distance. Yeah. So the immediacy of that knowing is something we all share. That's a pretty extraordinary thing to consider if you feel alone. Loneliness is a sense of what we're doing with thought that doesn't even exist. It has no content. Discontent is an admission that there's no content in the thought. So we feel uneasy all the time and restless, trying to figure out why we don't feel grounded. There's no ground under that thing. We're floating and wondering why we can't feel settled. There's no balance in it.
Right. It's a wrong thought.
Yeah. Well, and it isn't the wrong thought we can have, we can take or leave. It's when we think it's right and decide to defend it that we create the internal conflict.
Yeah, exactly.
So there's some contention that we're not responsible for the first thought. I would say that's not correct, because if I wasn't capable of thinking, then I would not be responsible for the first thought. But if I'm capable of having the first thought, I must be responsible for the first thought, even when I don't think I am. And my sense is, in taking responsibility, I'm trying to take it so that I can assign it elsewhere when I don't want to take it. When I begin to see responsibility as the nature of my existence, I begin to see that I can't get out of it any more than a fish can leave the water quickly or happily. It's just a state of being that's natural to us. We're keenly aware of it, and any deviation from that in thought and thus action hurts us. And we know, and pain is literally telling us something is wrong. Mental anguish is telling us immediately something's wrong here. And it's what we're thinking that's wrong. If you can settle on that, you'll start to see a lot of those thoughts that you thought you might need to travel distances to figure out and dig into will start to dissipate and reveal themselves in more honest fashions than the fashion we end up reinterpreting them in our desperate search to finally find what is not lost.
I think for me, the word responsibility then also means like I know in the past this has been true, can also be associated with fault. So like if I'm responsible for the first thought that I have, then it's also my fault if it's bad or if it's wrong. And I don't think that's what you're saying. What you're saying is that all of your thoughts are yours. They're your responsibility because you are the owner of your thoughts, right? Yeah. That is something, right, that, I definitely experienced because of my thought processes about this, that taking responsibility for something also meant it was my fault. Like I decided I was a bad person if I had bad thoughts.
Yeah.
And that's
because you're thinking you're what you think.
Right. Exactly. And
it's a real trick of the ego to allow yourself to claim the thoughts are yours at all, right? These thoughts are mine.
The ego has no life to trick us, but we talk in those terms to make it appear to be something distinct and separate from us, acting against us, rather than something we're doing very cleverly disguised as something that we're not doing.
Right.
That's what we hear people say, my thoughts are attacking me. Like my thoughts have never gotten up at 3 a.m. and attacked me, but I have woken up with thoughts that were basically contemptible and under attack from my own incursion, not from something being done to me. That transition takes a minute to say, oh, if I'm actually responsible by nature, this isn't a negotiable issue. And if I begin to be responsible for everything I'm doing and everything that's happening as a result, I'm starting to actually think aligned with how I am rather than who I think I am and how I think I am. It starts to make that line that thinking's just something I do. When I misuse it or overuse it and try to have it become my source, I'm trying to ask it to do what it can't, and all of a sudden I wonder why life feels impossible. Life has never been impossible. It's been doing what it's been doing as long as it's been doing it. A lot longer than my thoughts have been going on. And yet, it's always in the ever-presence of the moment. It's not a past thing. It's not a historic thing. It's not a future thing. There is no past or future other than in thought. Things around the universe aren't worried about getting old. Things aren't saying, oh, 14 billion years. I could have had a V8. I need to get the wrinkles out of time. They're just doing what they're doing. We have the unique capacity by being able to be able to choose wrong and then choose to believe we didn't choose it and that it isn't wrong and that someday we'll make it right and someday we'll be the answer to the world's problems when in fact we're the creator and we're feeding into the grid of anxiety that everybody experiences and uses to justify the continued reactiveness. And I think to the word, one of the points I thought you were on the verge of making, Alyssa, is this idea of responsibility is the ability to respond. And the ability to respond is to consider the response before. A reaction is an immediate knee-jerk justification, immediately bouncing back because it's prone to defense, and that reactive nature is protecting something. What's it protecting but something that's weak to need protection? Right. Something strong and infinite that's inviolable, that can't be changed, has no defense. It doesn't argue with us when we say truth isn't true. It doesn't say, oh, I got to swoop down and get that gnat with my thumb and wipe it out. Yeah. So that responsibility is a distinction. Impulsive, reactive, and compulsive behaviors are all reflections of lies being maintained, all of them, not some of them. So this discussion is about the disease of addiction as being a mental problem, exactly as it's stated in the big book, exactly as it was outlined by doctors early on who began to categorize it accurately enough that people could get some freedom from symptoms. And some people got great freedom from symptoms, but the symptoms still have an underlying cause that becomes clearer once those symptoms are arrested or recovered from. The issue becomes more obvious to people. And people who live in sobriety, for instance, tend to understand those issues a lot clearer than people who are continuing to treat the symptoms by drinking and anesthetizing themselves, by making believe that feeling is the problem, and if you feel better, the problem is getting better, when in fact the problem is being maintained and multiplied quietly while you're making believe it's not happening.
Yes.
So one of the things I want to do before we're done, and it's about an hour now, is think about the next group and think about a topic that we can develop out of here that may seem unanswered or seem like Sturgis brought in this idea of filleting this thing a little bit and starting to open it up in terms of what addiction means. You talked about it, Alyssa, and what like open up the process of telling somebody what to think and having people begin to see that what they're thinking is what they're choosing. So those were a couple of things that came up in this discussion that I think we got to explore a little bit. What can we offer the next group, the next conversation in terms of a topic to maybe start them and give them a basis for and a link to what we're doing or what we did today?
For me, I think that was a question, right?
Yes.
To sort of just, yeah. So for me, one of the elements of both the interview we heard as well as what we've talked about today is that we just touched on it, right? I mean, the poet describes some tactics as walking, for instance, how he walks for 5 hours a day, and how that sort of helps that sort of combination of body and spirit allows this conversation to emerge and these sort of thoughts to become somehow part of their natural state in a conscious way. And I thought it might be interesting because I get stuck here too, frankly, right? Like this is one of the parts that I struggle with as we turn the soil on this for a long time now. How thoughts are associated with feelings, and how the sort of physical, if you will, sensation of feelings, is connected to the thoughts that we're having, and the thoughts, I mean, just to kick it off, right? I mean, thoughts associated with one feeling for me, right, can actually like run rampant. Like they turn into the thousands, right? And my understanding of the kind of underlying emotion versus my ability to spin around on it are often at odds, and less rewarding, I think, than simply catching the thought, before the sail of it swings across the boat and sends me off in a completely different direction by 90 degrees. So I thought that might be fertile ground.
Sure.
Because we inched at it a little bit, and I know I get wrapped up in that sort of that alchemy quite a bit, and I know you have a lot to say about it, Jack. So I thought that might be one topic.
That's great. I think that for me, it's a bit different. So it's a different theme than what Sturgis brought, which I love. So I think maybe it could be for a different show, or maybe tied into our next one. I'm not sure. But we touched on what freedom is. We talked a bit about freedom, but I think to really go and fillet what freedom means is important, and also how forgiveness fits into this, the idea of forgiveness, because for me, this is a very powerful way out of compulsive thought, which is still a thought, right? But it's a way out. So those are a couple of topics I'd like to fillet.
Well, and in leaving today too, my experience is I talk a lot because I'm excited to be able to talk about this, because I lived for decades thinking I had to keep secret what I was thinking. And I suffered from depression, and I suffered from compulsions, and I did things that were wrong to distract myself from the agony. And I wanted to share generously the trouble I was making inside by causing trouble on the outside as a kid. So I thought I could actually bring some harmony by having everyone else be troubled too. And I was very good at that. And I don't talk about this now because I am free from it. I talk about it because I recognize that I'm free to choose it anytime I want, and often do during the day. The only difference is starting to see it quickly and know that where there's a disturbance, I'm up to something. And that's the words I started using years ago with Sturgis. I think you remembered, because I think you've mentioned it during our weekly discussion, that I'd say, you're up to something. And I would just let
I love that.
I would let that be my acknowledgement. I wouldn't say, why am I thinking this? Where is it? What happened? Where? Because that idea that it's somewhere else is the idea that it isn't here.
Yes.
And if the absolute is absolute, and the now is now, and the now is all now is where everything happens. There is no other place. There is no other time. It's now. There probably isn't any time in the infinitesimal slice of now, because it can't be broken into a minute that begins and ends and then starts over. It's just this constant flow of now and new. And if it's always new, it means I'm always free to choose. I'm always free to re-choose. I'm always free to stop. I'm always free to start. It gives me the complete latitude. Freedom, what's interesting about freedom is it does not come at a cost.
Right.
And if you think of how humans talk about it, it always comes at a cost.
Right.
It's odd to talk about freedom as coming. It's like saying 2 for 1 if you pay for 3.
Right.
If a store ever advertised that, you'd think, what are they, out of their fucking minds?
Right.
But we do that.
Right.
We think that way. So my sense is, on the simple basis, forgiveness is also just letting things be as they are. And the only thing that's contemptible is thinking they're not. And when I think they're not, the forgiveness isn't in the thing I think I'm blaming and faulting. It's in my vision of them being less than I am and we are.
Yeah.
It's in this division in that way.
Yes. I on the most simple level, I agree with you, but it's so that topic is so nuanced because of thought. It presents complex.
Yeah, well, it's what you were describing, Sturgis, is that if you divide 1.5, if you divide 1 in half, you can divide it forever and never get to 0. That's what we do with thought that's obsessive. We keep thinking that if we come up with a new wrong thought, we're going to masquerade as a new truth and all of a sudden divide off from the old truth. And what seems new is really just the old thing being regurgitated in new ways. And we get lost in this camouflage of thoughts that seem to blind us and keep us so busy, but we're creating it to claim to be cut off to support the original contention that we not only, it's not that we think we are cut off, it's think that the thought that we can be that threatens us and scares us. It's not that we are, because we can't be.
Right.
But the thought that we can be, that anticipation of the fear it's like going to the dentist. It generally is harder in the week before you get a tooth pulled than the time it takes to get the tooth pulled.
Right.
Right? When you're finally there, it kind of happens, it's over and you're done. In the week 4, it's like, oh, what am I going to do? I got to get a tooth. All that kind of thing. Anticipation is also often worse than the actual experience. So I don't say that to answer those questions, but to engage in those questions and begin to say that the absolute can always be interjected because it's always our present state of awareness. And when we think in absolute terms, we introduce thinking to an absolutely reliable form of thought that puts it to rest compared to constantly asking us it to be in constant motion. Truth is true. Love is love. These aren't they're not arguable, thought-provoking conclusions. They're simply beginning to see that the absolute nature of our existence is absolute. And if that is the case and we start to think so, our thinking will quickly align and beginning to do things that we wouldn't expect of it because it's no longer doing contemptible things that we want to deny doing. Starts to naturally express that loving nature, that fulfillment, that abundance, that generosity, the support that's functional, not wanting to help somebody that's unwilling to help themselves in the idea that I'm a big deal and I can help somebody, but starting to actually help them by simply saying, if you're not interested, you're free not to be interested. I give you the freedom. Go, my child. Go where you want, think what you want, do what you want. You're free. I have no hold on you. I have no interest in holding you. And people come to greater terms with themselves quicker when they begin to realize they're really free to do what they're doing than when you tell them they're condemned to having to do something you think they should do. And that's not what this is about. There's no telling anyone anything in this, but there's an asking everyone if maybe they consider some of these things, if it doesn't impact their experience a little bit in just simply imagining that something absolute is absolute in their daily practice or exercise, rather than imagining they're alone left to thinking what they're repetitively thinking and doing on a daily basis. So this is unscripted and unpolished and probably beneath the standards set by most podcasts and people that want to publish something. But my sense is this has been going on as long as humans have been fighting. It isn't something being talked about openly because for some reason we can call a runny nose sick and stay home from work. But when we start getting running thoughts, we don't mention that we're mentally ill and that we've got a sickness that can be treated by looking at it accurately and addressing it directly, rather than try to run from it and keep from it and thinking it's got to be kept a secret. It isn't a secret when we're depressed and we're maniacal and we're almost suicidal and we become addicted to all kinds of compulsions. That is not a secret. Most people notice it when we're doing it, even when we think they're not seeing it. It's still very obvious. Alyssa?
Yes. Agreed. No, I agree.
Yeah. So I appreciate you guys being here and being with us, and we're going to learn together how to discuss this as accurately as possible and do what we can to eliminate the perpetuation of ideas that continue to contribute to the maintenance of disease and allow the diagnosis to be accurate enough to address it and see that it's only been what we've been thinking the whole time that's been causing it, and what we've been thinking hasn't been true. And if we can begin to admit that, there's a great freedom in starting to see things accurately, because that knowing nature begins to become what we access, rather than this perpetual internal thought process that seems to be on a vicious cycle that never ends. Love you guys. Thank you very much for being here.
Love you. Thank you so much, Jack.
Thank you.
Appreciate the opportunity to be here.